neighborhood of the city, a symbol of John's undeniable success. From the height of its expansive windows, he gazed over his property with a certain pride, remembering the countless sleepless nights and sacrifices that led him to this moment. Wealthy, influential, and respected, he was the portrait of an accomplished man. By his side was Eliza, his wife, always so elegant, appearing to share in his satisfaction, though she carried a mystery in her eyes he failed to notice. "Is this what they call paradise on earth, John?" she asked in a voice almost too soft. He smiled, embracing her. "Yes, Eliza, this is everything I ever dreamed of, and it's only just beginning for us." John had built his empire with blood, sweat, and determination. Exhaustive dedication to work was simply part of his life. Eliza knew this and, in a way, admired her husband for his insatiable drive. "Tonight, let's go out for dinner. I reserved that restaurant you love," he said, his voice full of excitement. "You deserve the best, Eliza." She smiled, accepting his invitation with a discreet nod, while hiding a subtle expression of disdain. He, busy with his schedule and glued to his cell phone, failed to notice the slight change in her face. John's world revolved around appointments, contracts, and major decisions, and he believed Eliza was the perfect partner to support him. But John was, above all, a man of rigid values, who believed that every success needed to be shared with those by his side. "All of this is for us, for our future, Eliza. I want you always to feel secure, surrounded by the best of everything," he said, watching her adjust a pearl necklace in the mirror. "I know, John. I'm very lucky to be by your side," she replied, slightly enigmatic as she turned to face him, hiding any trace of dissatisfaction. He smiled, convinced that what he had built was solid and true. To him, the life he created was the best it could be. For John, it was just another one of Eliza's frequent nights out where she claimed she was going to the movies. He didn't suspect a thing, focused as he was on his business and responsibilities. "Enjoy the movie, dear," he'd say, pleased to see his wife taking a bit of time for herself. But the reality was different. Instead of going to the movies, Eliza always drove to a supermarket parking lot near the mansion, where she met Edward, John's younger brother, who shared with her a dangerous goal: finding a way to eliminate John and get their hands on his fortune. That night, Eliza arrived punctually at the meeting spot, adjusting the rearview mirror before getting out of the car. It didn't take long before she saw Edward waiting, leaning against a post, his gaze steady and determined. "So everything's ready?" he asked bluntly, his voice low and cautious. "Yes, it is," replied Eliza, glancing around to ensure they were alone. She detailed how John would be taking the car early the next morning for an important meeting, calling it a perfect plan, as no one would suspect an accident. Edward nodded in satisfaction. For both of them, this was their golden moment to seize John's fortune, a plan they believed was flawless. Eliza and Edward's ambition wasn't only to be free of John, but also to secure the comfort and wealth his money could provide. They had already worked out the details. Edward, who had access to the mansion's garage due to the trust his brother placed in him, would take care of tampering with John's brakes, ensuring that everything appeared natural. "That way, it'll seem like a misfortune, something beyond control," Edward commented, without a hint of hesitation. "This, no one will suspect, and the fortune will be yours, Eliza," he concluded, with an ambitious smile. She simply nodded, satisfied and confident that after this plan, she'd have everything she desired. What neither of them knew was that on that same night, a street boy was hiding in the parking lot, looking for shelter from the cold. David, a clever and observant boy, noticed the suspicious whispers and gestures of the couple. Curious, he quietly crept closer, hiding behind one of the parked cars, and began listening to every word. He quickly understood that John, the man they mentioned, was the target of a plot for Eliza and Edward to take all his money. Even though he was young, David felt the gravity of what he had overheard. While Eliza and Edward exchanged glances, reaffirming their commitment to the plan, David listened intently, processing their story. "Tomorrow he leaves early, there's no mistake," said Eliza confidently. "Exactly, and he has no idea what's coming," Edward replied, laughing with a tone of anticipated victory. To them, it was only a matter of time until John was out of the picture and the fortune fully under Eliza's control. But to David, it sounded like a dangerous warning, a plot he knew he needed to dismantle. Despite the fear pulsing in his chest, David realized he had to act. With no family or home, he lived on the streets and knew that to most people he was invisible, yet his conscience weighed on him, and he felt the need to do something to prevent this injustice. Eliza and Edward said their goodbyes, agreeing not to contact each other until the next day, when, in their minds, they'd be one step closer to inheriting everything. They left the parking lot, certain that no one would ever know about their conspiracy. However, David, with a tight heart, was determined to warn John, even if he didn't know how he would be received. As the two conspirators walked away, David pondered what to do. He didn't know John, but he knew that man was in danger and would lose everything due to the greed of these two. As Eliza bid farewell to Edward and walked back to her car, David remained hidden, watching her movements. The dark plan he had just overheard still echoed in his mind, and he knew he needed to find out where she lived. As soon as Eliza started her car and left the parking lot, the boy made a bold decision. He would follow her that very night. He knew that if he waited until the next day, it could be too late to stop what they planned for John. David began trailing her through the streets, trying to keep his distance so as not to be noticed, but without losing sight of her. Although he was just a boy, his life on the streets had taught him to be discreet, to go unnoticed. Eliza drove, unaware that someone was following her every turn, a few meters behind. The surroundings began to change. The houses grew larger and more luxurious until she finally turned down a tree-lined lane. The boy knew he was getting closer to discovering where John lived. As he turned the corner, David saw the mansion. Even in the dark, he could make out the grand contours of the property, the tall gates, the lights illuminating the entry path, and the imposing structure of the house. He was impressed by the size and beauty of the place, but at the same time, the weight of what Eliza and Edward planned made the scene feel more threatening than welcoming. Eliza entered the gates without hesitation, and David watched as she disappeared, leaving the boy there, hidden in the shadows of the trees, concealed by the night. David moved a bit closer, taking in the house where the man in danger lived. He felt a mix of urgency and fear, knowing he would have to tell him everything he had overheard. Despite being just a child, he knew he couldn't ignore the responsibility of preventing what was about to happen. "I have to tell him. He needs to know what they're plotting," he murmured softly to himself, trying to gather the courage needed to approach a stranger who seemed untouchable to him. As he observed the mansion, David thought about how to approach John. He had nothing but his word and knew he was just a street boy, someone usually unnoticed or not taken seriously. But as he remembered the conversation between Eliza and Edward, his fear gave way to unwavering determination. He didn't know how, but he would make John believe him. "I have to try. If I don't do something, a tragedy will happen," he whispered, more to himself than to the night surrounding him. That illuminated grand house seemed to be the symbol of a perfect life, and the contrast with what he knew about Eliza and Edward made the boy feel a heaviness in his chest. How could someone so close desire to remove John just to inherit his money? David, who had learned early on the value of survival on the streets, couldn't comprehend how anyone could be willing to destroy a life purely for greed. And it was this realization that gave him the final push he needed to decide that as soon as he had the chance, he would introduce himself to John. David stayed hidden in the shadows for a few more minutes, observing every detail of the mansion to ensure he would remember the way there. With the image of the house etched in his mind, he quietly walked away, determined to return and tell the millionaire the truth, not knowing if he would be heard, but believing his attempt could make all the difference. The next morning, David arrived early and positioned himself strategically near the gates of John's mansion. He had spent the night thinking about everything he'd overheard and felt an almost suffocating urgency to warn that man about the plot unfolding in the shadows, but at the same time, the fear of not being taken seriously haunted him like a shadow. "What if he ignores me? What if he doesn't believe me?" he muttered to himself, trying to gather courage. However, as he remembered Eliza and Edward's laughter while plotting, his determination grew. He couldn't allow something so terrible to happen. Time seemed to drag until finally David saw John's car approaching the gates. He waited until the vehicle was closer and, in a desperate impulse, ran to intercept it, frantically waving. John was startled, surprised to see a boy suddenly appear in his path. "What are you doing here?" John asked with a mixture of irritation and surprise, rolling down the window. "I need to speak to you. It's urgent." "It's about your safety," David replied, trying to sound as serious as possible. John looked at him with suspicion, but something in the boy's expression made him pause. "All right, speak quickly. What's so important?" John said, frowning. David took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the words he was about to say. "I overheard a conversation between your wife and your brother Edward," he began, watching John's every reaction. "They're planning something. They want They want something to happen to you so they can get all your money." John's expression changed, his eyes narrowed, and he let out a disbelieving laugh. "That's absurd. Eliza and Edward, they would never do that." But David persisted, each word coming out with desperate urgency. "I know it sounds strange, but it's true. I heard everything last night. They talked about tampering with your car, something that would cause an accident. Please, sir, just check the brakes before you leave." "I know what I heard," he said with pleading eyes. The intensity in the boy's voice, combined with the genuine fear in his gaze, made John hesitate. Something within him, a nearly involuntary instinct, warned him about what the boy was saying. Even without fully believing, he decided to follow David's advice, if only to dispel any doubt. John got out of the car, his heart racing, and went to the garage. He asked his personal mechanic to inspect the brakes, and after a few minutes of silence, the result was a devastating revelation. The brakes had, in fact, been tampered with. He felt a chill run up his spine, the idea of what it meant hitting him like an avalanche. The trust he had always had in Eliza began to dissolve in a cloud of doubt and disbelief. "This can't be happening. Not her. Not my brother," he murmured, feeling a mixture of shock and betrayal that he could barely process. David watched everything closely, his attentive eyes capturing each reaction of John. Seeing the expression of horror forming on the man's face, he sensed that John finally understood the gravity of the situation. John turned to the boy, now without the look of suspicion. Instead, there was a recognition of the courage the boy had shown by risking everything to tell him the truth. "Why did you do this, boy? Why would you risk so much to warn someone you don't even know?" David lowered his head, unsure of how to answer. I just knew it was wrong, and that you needed to know." Still stunned, John reflected on the situation unfolding before him. The wife he had trusted so much, the brother he had always supported, conspiring to remove him from the picture. He could barely believe it, but the evidence was there, and now he knew his life was truly in danger. The look he gave David held more than gratitude. It was also a silent apology for almost dismissing the warning that, if ignored, could have cost him his life. Without wasting time, John composed himself and turned back to David with newfound resolve. "I owe you my life, boy. I don't know how, but I'll find a way to reward this courage." David simply nodded, still processing what had just happened. The morning he discovered his car's brakes had been sabotaged, John felt the crushing weight of betrayal, still trying to process the idea that Eliza and Edward were plotting against him. He returned to find David, the street boy who had risked everything to warn him. With his mind reeling, John knelt to David's height and, with deep sincerity, said, "You saved my life, boy. If it weren't for you, I might not be here now." David only nodded, still amazed at the millionaire's gratitude but determined to continue helping. John knew he couldn't handle the situation alone. He needed someone he could trust, someone to help him keep the secret and think of a way to stop Eliza and Edward without arousing their suspicion. "I need you to stay by my side, boy. We're going to expose these two for who they really are," said John, observing the determined expression on David's face. The boy nodded, understanding the importance of what he had started. "Well, I'll help you. They won't even know we're on to them," he replied with a resolute air. Thinking quickly, John began crafting a plan. He knew that confronting Eliza and Edward wasn't enough. They needed to feel the weight of their actions and believe the plan had succeeded. "I'm going to change my will," said John, thinking aloud. "I'll arrange it so that if I die suspiciously, Eliza gets nothing." David listened intently, realizing this would block any chance for Eliza and Edward to profit from their plot. "So even if they go through with it, they won't gain anything?" asked the boy, a spark of understanding in his eyes. John nodded, pleased to see that the boy understood. As he explained the plan to David, John realized the impressive courage and loyalty of the street boy. Despite all he had been through, David displayed a mature sense of justice that impressed him. "From now on, we act together. I'll make sure you never have to worry about anything again, and you in return will be my eyes and ears," said John firmly. David, moved by being treated as someone John fully trusted, nodded, determined to be part of the plan until the end. To prevent Eliza and Edward from suspecting anything, John knew they needed an additional step. After a moment of reflection, he looked at David and said, "Besides changing the will, we're going to do something more. I'll stage an accident. They need to believe they succeeded, that their plan worked." David's eyes widened in surprise, but soon a smile of understanding appeared on his face. "So they'll think you're gone and everything will be safe," murmured the boy, already imagining the impact it would have on Eliza and Edward. John agreed, noting David's growing confidence. Exactly. With that, they'll think everything went as planned, and when they're confident, we'll reveal everything. John concluded, satisfied. The boy nodded, more certain than ever that he was on the right side. The decisive night arrived, and John and David were ready to execute the plan they had been perfecting. Before heading to the road, John stopped at a predetermined spot and picked up David, who was waiting anxiously. The boy entered the car and exchanged a determined look with John. "It's time, kid. We need everything to look real so they'll believe it completely," John said, gripping the wheel tightly. David nodded seriously. "I'm with you, Mr. John. Let's do this," he replied, his voice filled with courage and determination. John drove calmly to a deserted road where they had planned to stage the accident. Earlier, he had told Eliza he would spend a few days at the country house to relax. Eliza, satisfied, said goodbye with a subtle smile. "Take care, dear, and enjoy the rest," she said, believing the end was near and that she would finally get what she desired. John, keeping a neutral expression, hid what he knew and set off, taking David with him to the point where they would take the next step of the plan. David. When they arrived at the isolated area, John and David got out of the car and began preparing the scene. The boy observed everything closely, ensuring no detail was left that might reveal it was all a ruse. He searched the car's interior to make sure there were no belongings of John's that could identify him. "Everything's clear here, sir," said David with a firmness that impressed John. "Perfect," he replied, pleased with the boy's precision. The next step was the most delicate. John prepared the device that would trigger the fire, transforming the car into a pile of metal and ash, something no one would question. He and David retreated to a safe distance, and then John activated the device. Flames quickly engulfed the car, illuminating the dark sky with an intense, destructive glow. David watched, both fascinated and apprehensive, as the fire consumed the vehicle until nothing remained but an unrecognizable structure. To anyone who saw the scene, it would appear as the tragic end of a man on a deserted road. The next morning, news of the accident spread quickly. The charred car had been found, and everyone believed John was dead. Eliza received the news with a carefully calculated expression of shock, but her gaze reflected relief. "He really isn't here anymore," she murmured to Edward later as they spoke privately. Edward, unable to hide his grin of satisfaction, replied, "Now we just wait for the inheritance. Everything we wanted is within our reach." Eliza, pretending to be a grieving widow, began to play the role of the inconsolable wife, receiving condolences with a restrained look. To everyone, she was a woman in deep mourning, but in moments of solitude, she was already planning her new future with Edward. The two, believing that everything had gone as expected, felt increasingly secure and confident that John's fortune was within their grasp. Meanwhile, David, who had helped with every detail of the staging, continued to monitor the two, remaining discreet at all times. He observed how Eliza and Edward exchanged satisfied glances and kept discussing details about accessing the inheritance. With every step of the couple in mind, David reported everything to John, who was now safe in his hiding place. "They're completely convinced you're dead, and they're already thinking the money is guaranteed," David said with seriousness. John, listening intently, felt the plan's success drawing near. Now, with confirmation that Eliza and Edward had fallen for the trap, John and David were ready to proceed with the next phase. A few days after the staged accident, Eliza and Edward, now officially the widow and mourning brother-in-law, went to John's lawyer's office to address the inheritance. The two were convinced that nothing stood between them and John's fortune. On the way, Eliza felt a mix of anxiety and excitement she tried to hide at all costs. Edward, by her side, exchanged knowing and confident glances with her, certain that the moment they'd been waiting for had arrived. "Soon all of this will just be a memory," he said with a discreet smile. Eliza agreed with a slight nod, barely able to contain her excitement. Upon entering the office, they were greeted by John's lawyer, who displayed solemn and professional respect. He greeted Eliza and Edward formally, offering them a seat and making it clear that the inheritance process would be handled with the utmost seriousness. "Please be patient. We'll go through all the documents before finalizing anything," the lawyer explained, picking up a hefty folder from the desk. Eliza nodded with a carefully constructed look of grief. She needed to show the lawyer that she was there only as a widow fulfilling formalities, while in truth her heart was in another place, lighter and content. The lawyer began reviewing the will, detailing John's assets and each provision carefully. As she listened to the values, the properties, and every detail, Eliza felt her heart race. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. Everything was exactly as she had dreamed. But then suddenly, the reading of the will took an unexpected turn. "There's a special clause here that was recently added," said the lawyer with a serious look. Eliza and Edward exchanged glances, slightly confused but still maintained their composure. "Just a minor detail, I assume," commented Edward, trying to appear calm without showing any expression. The lawyer continued with the explanation. "The new clause states that John's inheritance can only be received by his wife if he dies of natural causes. In the event of an accident or any suspicious circumstance, the wife and her heirs are excluded from the right to the fortune." The lawyer's voice was firm, each word falling on Eliza and Edward like a bomb. They looked at each other in shock, unable to react for a few moments. Eliza tried to keep her composure, but her eyes betrayed the disbelief and anger beginning to surface. This must be a mistake," said Eliza, her voice slightly trembling, trying to remain calm. Edward, beside her, was trying to absorb what he had just heard. "Yes, what's this about? John would never do something like that without telling us. Without telling Eliza," he insisted, unable to completely hide his frustration. The lawyer looked at the two with an expression that mixed seriousness with slight disapproval. It was John's own decision and it's duly documented. This clause was added days before the accident. Shock and anger began to show on Eliza's face. She looked at Edward, trying to find an explanation, but all she saw in her brother-in-law's face was the same mixture of frustration and despair. Edward shook his head, as if trying to deny what he had heard, while Eliza, now unable to contain her anger, slammed her hands on the desk. "This is unacceptable. He did this on purpose," she exclaimed, the mask of the grieving widow gradually crumbling. The lawyer observed her reaction closely, the coldness in his eyes suggesting that something was out of the ordinary. It was then that an unexpected presence entered the room. John, alive and well, accompanied by David, appeared at the office door. The sight of the man they believed they had removed from the picture made Eliza and Edward freeze, shock overtaking their faces. John took a few steps forward, his serious and firm gaze fixed on them. "Surprised to see me?" he asked in a calm tone, yet laden with indignation. Eliza and Edward were silent, words caught in their throats, unable to form any excuse. David, standing beside John, observed the two with a look of contained victory. He had been part of every step of the plan and was now witnessing the truth come to light. John took another step forward and with a firm voice said, "I know everything. I know about your plan. I know about the conversation in the parking lot. I know how much you wanted to see me out of the way to take my money." The panic and guilt were evident on Eliza and Edward's faces as they tried to absorb the reality that it had all been a trap. John advanced slowly across the lawyer's office, each step carrying the weight of betrayal. The disappointment so deep it seemed almost tangible. The silence filling the room was suffocating, and every glance between him, Eliza, and Edward was a nonverbal battle of repressed feelings and exposed intentions. At that moment, the man Eliza and Edward knew was distant standing before them was someone hardened by pain, a John who bore an immeasurable sadness and an unyielding will to confront the evil he never imagined existed by his side. "So you really thought you could get rid of me? That everything would be perfect for you with no consequences?" His voice echoed, firm, controlled, yet carrying the intensity of someone deeply wounded. Eliza remained silent for a moment, her eyes searching for any reaction of pity, any opening she could use to soften the situation. "John, we only wanted," she began, her voice trembling, trying to sound remorseful, but the coldness in John's eyes cut off any attempt at manipulation. He would not let her escape with more lies. "Wanted what, Eliza? You wanted everything I built, everything I fought to achieve and shared with you, and you, Edward? I thought we were brothers, and what did you do? Stabbed me in the back." The impact of each word was devastating. Edward, who had been avoiding John's gaze until then, shrank, unable to bear the shame he felt. He knew there was no excuse that could repair what he had done, but still, the attempt at self-defense came almost reflexively. Edward pushed at himself, finding himself instantly awake. "John, it was a mistake. I was confused. Eliza made me believe it was best for her, that you were no longer," he began. but John interrupted him with a coldness that almost froze the room. "Don't blame Eliza for what you did, Edward. This was your choice. Every step, every detail. You chose to betray me. You chose to believe that my life, my future could be discarded without consequence." Hearing this, Eliza began to lose control, realizing her last cards were running out. "John, we both know that over the years you distanced yourself. I felt alone, invisible. You were always focused on your business, on your companies, and all I wanted was someone who truly saw me," she said, her voice now elevated, revealing all the anger and frustration she had kept hidden. "I couldn't live in the shadow of a man who was more married to his fortune than to me. If that's betrayal, then I'm sorry, John. But I didn't want to keep being just a decorative figure." John listened to her words, but any remaining compassion he might have felt had dissolved in the pain and frustration. "And you chose to resolve it by planning my death. Is that how you respond when something seems out of place, Eliza? Instead of talking, instead of seeking a solution, you chose to take me out of the picture as if I were disposable." He turned his gaze to Edward, the deep sadness still evident on his face. "And you, did you ever understand what loyalty is? What family is? Because what you did is as far as one can get from truly being a brother." While John spoke, David, who had remained silent by his side, watched each word delivered like a sentence. He, who had overheard Eliza and Edward's whispers, understood the gravity of it all, but watching John confront them head-on, without fear and with such dignity, felt like witnessing the closure of justice he never imagined possible. The boy's loyalty was unshakable, and he looked at John with a mixture of respect and empathy. Then, with calculated calm, John turned to the lawyer and gave a slight nod. The lawyer, silent until then, signaled with his head, and the door to the office opened. 2 police officers entered, having been called to wait for the moment of the final confrontation. Eliza and Edward, seeing the uniforms, finally realized the depth of their situation. Eliza's mask of calculated coldness broke. She began to struggle, panic finally taking over. "John, you can't do this. I loved you, John. I did this for us," she screamed, her voice now twisted with rage and panic, desperately trying to justify the unjustifiable. John remained firm, unmoved by the screams. "You didn't do this for us, Eliza. You did it for yourself and your greed. If there was an ounce of love, you would have acted differently, but you chose the cruelest path. You were corrupt." As the police handcuffed Eliza and Edward, John felt a painful relief, as if he were closing a chapter of his life in the most bitter way possible. He watched the 2 being taken away, each trying in vain to protest, their faces a mix of hatred and regret. In his heart, John knew this moment wouldn't bring happiness, but a sense of cold and necessary justice. David, still by his side, watched the outcome with a look of quiet satisfaction. He knew that thanks to his intervention, a bitter truth had come to light, and that the man beside him now had a secure future. When the police finally left with Eliza and Edward, leaving a heavy silence in the office, John looked at David, and for a moment, the weight of the entire situation seemed to ease. Placing a hand on the boy's shoulder, he said sincerely, "If it weren't for you, kid, I wouldn't be here to see this happen." David, who had stood firm until then, only nodded, feeling that behind this harsh revelation, something new was born, a bond and a trust that nothing could break. After the final confrontation and the arrest of Eliza and Edward, John felt the weight of the last few weeks start to dissipate, though he knew his life would never be the same. The deep betrayal he experienced made him more cautious and aware that trust was precious, not given lightly. Sitting in his office, he thought about the life he would now have to rebuild, and as he looked to his side, he saw David, the street boy who had become his ally and, more than that, his salvation. John knew that this boy deserved a better future, far from the dangers and uncertainties of the streets. John called David to sit beside him, looking at him with an admiration the boy still didn't fully understand. "You gave me something no one else did, David," said John sincerely. "Your loyalty saved me, and I'll never forget it." David, still shy, looked down, trying to contain his emotions. He knew he had done the right thing, but hadn't expected recognition. "I just did what I thought was right, Mr. John. I couldn't let them do that to you," he replied, his voice almost a whisper. John smiled, feeling a different warmth in his chest. He knew there was something special in this boy, and that their futures were now intertwined in an unexpected way. Then, With a determination that had been maturing over the last few days, he made a decision that would change David's life forever. "I want you to be part of my family, David. I'll take care of you, help you build a future, and more than that, I'll teach you everything I know so you can grow safely and have the opportunities you deserve," he announced with a firmness that made the boy's eyes shine with hope. John's will, which had recently been updated to prevent Eliza from inheriting his fortune, was revised once more, this time with an important addition. David would be the main heir, and John would do everything to ensure he was prepared to take care of the empire he had built with such effort. The lawyer reviewed the papers, while John explained each detail of the new decision to David. "This means that in the future you'll be in charge of everything, but for that we'll work together, learn everything necessary so you can become a wise and just leader." The news made the boy feel a mix of pride and surprise. David, who had grown up without family or structure, could hardly believe what he was hearing. He tried to hold back tears, but his eyes betrayed his emotions, and John, sensing the impact of the news, placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You deserve it, David, and I'll be by your side every step of the way, so you never have to go through the hardships you've faced until now." At that moment, something profound was sealed between them, a bond that transcended words. David knew that alongside John, he would have a bright future, but also felt the responsibility that came with this trust. He silently vowed to honor everything he was receiving and to become a man of value, just as John believed he could be. From that day forward, they would work together, not only as mentor and apprentice, but as a true family, building a future full of possibilities. With the end of the intrigues and the promise of a shared future, John and David embarked on a new phase of their lives. For both, it was a rebirth. David, the street boy who had risked everything to save John's life, now walked by his side, no longer as a stranger, but as a true member of the family they were forming. John, in turn, felt transformed. Everything he had gone through in recent months had changed his views on loyalty, trust, and the value of true relationships. The mansion's routine adapted to David's presence, and gradually, John introduced him to the secrets of his empire. At first, David felt a bit out of place, as if he were living in a dream that could end at any moment. But John, with patience and determination, made sure to show him that he belonged there. "Well, you're going to learn everything I know, kid. I don't want you to just inherit what I built. I want you to understand how everything works, to become someone who leads with intelligence and integrity," John would say. Each lesson, a new step in strengthening David's confidence and skills. Day by day, John taught David not only the practical aspects of business, but also the importance of solid values. Respect, responsibility, and honesty are what sustain true leadership. "If you carry this with you, you'll be someone who makes a difference," he taught, while David absorbed every word, longing with all his heart to become the kind of man John believed he could be. Gradually, the boy's admiration for his mentor turned into a deep desire to become worthy of the trust placed in him. John also felt a renewal in his heart. Each day spent with David revealed a new joy, a purpose beyond business success. Watching the boy grow, learn, and transform made him realize that life wasn't just about accumulating wealth, but leaving a legacy that truly mattered. "You're my family now, David, and family means support, trust, and always being there," he said one day, watching the boy struggle to overcome the challenges that training brought. This feeling gave John a new reason to live, something he never expected to find. They shared moments that went far beyond business. Quiet dinners, conversations about life, plans, and laughter that filled the mansion with an energy that had long been absent. For David, this experience was like a new life, a chance for redemption and growth. And beside John, he finally found a home, something he had always been denied. Gradually, he gained confidence, exploring the potential John saw in him, feeling stronger and more capable each day. As time passed, the bond between John and David solidified, and the two formed a true partnership, father and son, mentor and apprentice. And, even with the challenges ahead, both knew they would face everything together with the unshakable loyalty they had built. In the mansion, the cold, distant silence had been replaced by something warmer and more alive, a new energy built on mutual trust and respect. It was the beginning of a story of overcoming, friendship, and hope. John and David, united by a dark past, now moved toward a bright future. The story of John and David shows us that loyalty and trust are the greatest treasures. John, a man betrayed by those he loved most, found a true ally in the unlikely David, a street boy who risked everything to save him. Together, they teach us that family is not always those who share our blood, but those who choose to stand by us in the most challenging times. If you were moved by this story and want to follow other reflections like this, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss.